In this video, you are going to learn about how plants, specifically plants with seeds, reproduce. So why are pollen and seeds so important? Well, the fruits and vegetables that you eat come from seed plants. Another reason is that all flowers are produced from seed plants. If we didn't have seed plants, or if seed plants had stopped reproducing, we would not have a lot of our food, and we would also not be able to enjoy flowers, which make our earth so beautiful. So when you first think about pollen, you might think about how allergic you are to it. At least that's what I think about when I first think about pollen. But it's really, really important if plants are going to reproduce. So pollen grains have this water-resistant covering, which is kind of like an adaptation for this part of the plant. And it contains male gametophyte parts, or male reproductive parts, that can also produce sperm. Sperm from the pollen are carried by the wind or animals, as you can see, like bees here and here, to the female part of the plant. The transfer of this pollen grain to the female part of the plant is called pollination. So after fertilization happens, the female part of the plant can now develop into a seed. And the seed has three main parts: the embryo, the stored food, which feeds the embryo, and the protective seed coat, which protects the seed and the embryo from outside things. In the seed, the embryo grows to a certain stage and then stops until the seed is planted. So there are two types of seed plants. So these are two types of plants. The first one is gymnosperms, and examples of gymnosperms are like pine trees, spruce trees, Christmas trees, and in these types of plants the seeds usually develop in cones, as you can see in this picture right here. The other type of seed plant are angiosperms, and examples of angiosperms are flowers, different types of crops, and plants that grow fruit. These seeds develop into flowers and fruit, as you can see in these pictures here. During gymnosperm reproduction, the cones are the reproductive structures. Each gymnosperm species has a different cone, making them very unique. Gymnosperms have male and female cones. A mature female cone contains 2 ovules where the egg is produced. Pollen grains are produced in the smaller male cones. The pollen grains are released in the spring and carried to the female cones, where fertilization then occurs. Pollen is carried from the male cones to the female cones by the wind. From the moment the pollen grain falls on the female cone until the seeds are released can take up to 2 or 3 years, which is a really long time. That's why plants are so valuable and so important. Below here, you will see what a cone looks like at pollination. Let's zoom in on here. So that's what the cone can look like at pollination. So now on to angiosperm reproduction. All angiosperms have flowers, and flowers are important because they contain the reproductive organs. They contain structures that produce sperm or egg for sexual reproduction. The flower has 4 main parts. You labeled these today in your flower parts worksheet. The stamen, which is the male reproductive organ, and that's where the pollen is produced, in the stamen. The pistil, which is the female reproductive organ, the ovary, which is the swollen base of the pistil where ovules are found, and the sepals are another part of the flower, which form outside of the flower bud. Another part of the flower is the petals, which we all know is usually the most colorful part of the flower and makes up the biggest part of the flower, for the most part. So now that you know the parts of the flower, you can begin to understand how reproduction occurs in angiosperms. Pollen grains, which are carried by the wind or animals like bees, land on the sticky stigma of the pistil first. Then the sperm from the pollen grains fertilizes the egg. The zygote develops into a plant embryo, and then parts of the ovule become the seed's coat and the stored food. The ovary and other flower parts will form a fruit that surrounds the seed. So that's everything for today's video on plant reproduction. If you have any questions, please write them down below your notes, and we will discuss this more tomorrow in class.